Hey guys, I'm BRUTALZOID from Extremely Hardcore Overclocking, and I've been asked by BuildZoid to show you my HD7950. So this right here is my HD7950. As you can clearly see, this is an MSI card. In fact, this is an MSI Power Edition, which is loosely based on something that you might call a reference PCB. So, it has a 6-phase V-Core VRM, and a single-phase VCD-DCI, and a 2-phase memory VRM, which is completely inadequate, but it is the card that I got, so this is what I did to it. Initially, this card comes with no VRM heatsink whatsoever, and is entirely relying on its VRM cooling to come from the fact that there's a whole bunch of exposed copper on the PCB, as you can clearly see, and that does indeed improve VRM thermals a bit. But it doesn't improve VRM thermals as much as my giant freaking heatsink that I tore off a motherboard that didn't clock high enough after I killed it with a hacksaw. It also didn't like doing 8 GHz, and that's inadequate and unacceptable. So now, its heatsink is serving a higher purpose of making sure that this dinky little 6-phase doesn't blow up when I shove 1.45 volts through it with this dinky little air cooler. Why did I not get rid of the crappy little air cooler on the core? Because at 4,500, at 5,000, at the 5,000 RPM it goes up to, it screams like a banshee, and that's freaking brutal. You gotta know that the card is freaking suffering. Yeah. Now, the VRM heatsink, the thermal pads I'm using are Thermal Grizzly, because Thermal Grizzly is based on grizzly bears, and grizzly bears are badass. On the back of the card, you may notice I've done some more modifications, and of course, also on the front here as well. So, MSI, in their infinite wisdom, removed some of the capacitors for the V-Core VRM. Well, that's completely unacceptable. So I went and added 13 more capacitors to the V-Core VRM. These are Japanese Nichicon FP series capacitors, 1,500 microfarads, 2.5 volts, and 5 milliohm ESR. This makes these absolutely perfect for any application because they're freaking huge, and what you want from your capacitor is to be as big as freaking possible. So, with this truckload of capacitance smacked onto the V-Core VRM, the card clocks a whole 100 megahertz higher than it did before. That's right, this thing can do 1,500 megahertz with this tiny little vapor chamber based screechy air cooler. That's how brutal I am. Now then, the VDDCI VRM is this little single phase down here, and as you can clearly see, I've added 2 more Nichicon capacitors to that too. And that's the VRM right there. And unfortunately, these 2 low-side MOSFETs didn't get the heatsink. All of the MOSFETs on this thing are made by Magnachip Semiconductor, and they're MDU 1511s and MDU 1515s, which is basically a slight upgrade over what you'd find on like a reference RX 480 VRM. So that's why we got the giant freaking heatsink. Originally, the VRM also had overcurrent protection, which I promptly lifted, because overcurrent protection is for the cowardly, and I'm not cowardly, I'm brutal. So, that's what we got going on there. Now, if we look by the 6-pin connectors, you can see some more capacitors, because we need to filter the output of the power supply even more. Obviously, the card has its own 16-volt capacitors, but there's no such thing as too many. So 2 more capacitors on the inputs right there, and then of course, the PCIe slot provides garbage for power, so we need more capacitors on the 12 volts for the memory up here as well. And that's pretty much the extent of the modifications I've gone to on this card, as luckily, after the various BIOS modifications, the CHL8228G voltage controller on this thing means that I have complete voltage control for V-Core and for V-memory. So, there's not really any need to mess around with a little fine SMD soldering that BuildZoid does, because his cards never have working software voltage control. No, this card's badass. This thing's got proper software voltage control, and it's got proper cooling, and it's got a truckload of capacitors, and it outclocks every single little thing BuildZoid ever did. That's right. And now, I'm gonna go take this thing for a spin with X299 on BuildZoid's EVGA Dark motherboard to break all of his records. That's it for the video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.